It's my pleasure to announce and introduce our speaker for today. Fred Pfening and I were inductees in the same Rotary freshman class back in the day when each class was responsible for presenting one weekly program to the club in that calendar year. Our 20-plus member class wore paper bags over our heads at the podium, and we smoked Fred's dad's cigars. That was back in the old days. Fred, I believe the club board voted to abandon that program at the very next board meeting. That was the end of the whole program. These days, Fred runs a marvelous business that through engineering and, well, pure magic, moves flour from processed grain into baked goods, which we'll all enjoy this holiday season. Fred, as his father before him, is one of the most accredited authorities on circuses, both past and present. And they have been the source for many books about circuses. This is just one of them. Ladies and gentlemen, under the Rotary Big Top, I introduce to you, straight from the distant, rarely traversed, exotic land of Grandview Heights, not just a one, not just a two, but a full three. Incomparable Fred D. Pfening.
Well, I'll never live up to that introduction and that applause, and I appreciate seeing all the red noses out there, and that reminds me that the Guy Laliberté, who was the founder of Cirque du Soleil and is a remarkable person, he was a space tourist, and I think is the only one still who bought the VIP package and went to the space station. And anyhow, he wore a red nose when he went up in space, and he talked about himself being the only clown in space. So we have clowns in space and clowns in Rotary. I'm going to talk about the current circus season that's just ending right now, and then, if there's time, I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the circus, and particularly the history of the circus in Columbus. And we'll start with this year that's just ending of the circus, and it's been a pretty terrible year for the circus business in the United States. There are about 20 traveling circuses, some of which appear, just in arenas like Ringling Brothers, and others like, say, Carson and Barnes, that travel day by day under a tent. And there's probably about 10 or 12 shows that still use tents, and about 8 that tour, that do indoor dates. They play big ones like Ringling Brothers play in arenas, and then there are small ones like the Circus Pages that play in armories around the country. I think there's a number of reasons why it was such a bad year for the circus business, and I think weather had something to do with it. And it's really just been part of a overall kind of decline in the American circus over the last 30 or 40 years. In the traditional circus, there have been things that have come up like Cirque du Soleil that have kind of replaced it, and the circus business has been in kind of a transition for a long time. But even this year, Soleil had a pretty bad year, and that's remarkable because they were founded in 1984. And I think they produced like 23 or 24 new shows straight that were huge hits, made tons of money, toured the world, and just, added to the glory of Cirque du Soleil. And it's the biggest circus in the history of the world. It's headquartered in Montreal, but they do business worldwide, and they've got about 6 units or shows in Las Vegas on the Strip there in the casinos, and I'm sure some of you have been out have seen some of those. And then they have a couple of touring units in the United States, one in Europe, one in Asia, and I noticed the other day they're just about to open one in Moscow, a show. But for them, they had gone from strength to strength to strength over the years. Well, they finally hit the wall this year, and they had a couple of unsuccessful shows. And if you can imagine this, they had one in Vegas that was like Cirque du Soleil presents Elvis. Now, how could you combine Elvis and Cirque du Soleil and it didn't go over? But that happened, and they've laid off 600 people in their headquarters in Montreal, which I was there a couple of years ago, and oh my God, it's like going to Ohio State. I mean, it's just a gigantic operation. But, you know, we'll hear from them. They're not, I mean, this is for them, it's a big stumble. But they have been so successful that, you know, and they've got, you know, lots of cash reserves, and they'll be around again. The Ringling Brothers Circus had a very difficult year. They operate 3 units. They call them the red, the blue, and the gold, and they're all called Ringling Brothers, excuse me, Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus. Could I have my water, one or the other? Yeah.
They're both right here.
Oh, thank you. I'll just take this one. Thank you so much. So what happened with Ringling Brothers this year is they closed one of the circuses in September, and which was the gold unit, which is the smallest of the 3. And you know, that was, you know, not good news to the industry. But they're going to convert another one of their shows into a circus on ice, and they've also extended the tour of the show, of the current shows, because that will also go out and save them the expense. It will save them from doing every other year of having to spend all the money on the new costumes and new lighting and all the stuff that goes with a new production. So they've really had to cut back. Now, the Ringling Brothers Circus is part of a much bigger live entertainment company called Feld Entertainment. And Feld Entertainment, besides now the 2 circuses, operates about 7 ice shows, a monster truck show, a Marvel characters live show, and a bunch of other stuff. And all the other stuff coins money. This monster truck show has been unbelievably profitable for them. They gross about $1 million a day on that. And it, you know, if you were they're doing the same thing that anyone in here would do, that they've got, you know, obviously they've got, you know, a limited, you know, manpower and capital. And they have found over the years that they can frame an ice show. The expense of creating an ice show is a lot less than a circus, and it earns the same kind of money. And, you know, if you're going to have you're going to go with what has a better return on investment for you. And so that's what's been happening. That was their core business. When the Feld family bought the Ringling Brothers Circus from the Ringling family in 1967, you know, all they operated was, they bought 1 circus, and they turned that into 3, and then they've added all these Disney on Ice shows. They've had a very, very lucrative contract with Disney Studios for the last 20 years or so to produce Disney-themed ice shows. Then the one of which is what is it? Is it? I always get confused with this. The one that's called Ice, or it's about real cold. What's the name of that? Everybody, Frozen. Yes, that's of course. Yes, that's such a difficult word. They've done, you know, they've just, again, the Frozen show has been extremely successful. So, and the other thing that we see is happening is with American circuses is it's just every year it just seems like it's a little less on the cultural radar. And in the 19th century, the American circus was the equivalent of like the movie business today. And I mean, it was national news when Barnum and Bailey Circus would open in Madison Square Garden in, say, 1892. That would be covered in, you know, in all the newspapers in the country. And starting around 1900, you start to have all these competing entertainments. It started with the movie business, then it really started with vaudeville, and there was some deterioration with the circus's audience with that. But then it really started with movies, and then radio, television, and then, you know, in recent years, video games and the internet. So it's just not, you know, there's just too many other competing activities for leisure time. And I hate to say this, but the American circus is creatively kind of a backwater compared to Europe or to Asia. You'll have to bear with me. I had a operation about 8 years ago that screwed up my throat, and I have kind of constant laryngitis as a result of that. Anyhow, we'll muddle through. I was at a lecture at a event this summer where a woman gave a talk about what was going on with circuses in Europe, and it's just amazing. I mean, they do these things that haven't been seen on American circuses for 50, 75 years, and they do water shows and just all kinds of stuff. And the circus is very much alive and well in Europe, and it's seen as part of the performing arts community there, as opposed to entertainment for children, which it is generally seen as in this country. Although Soleil has brought a new audience in, it's become, it's a circus for adults. Amazingly enough, North Korea is, of all places, is on the forefront of circus arts, particularly with flying acts. They put together these unbelievable rigging that they'll do, and they'll have a guy will do like a quadruple or a quintuple somersault and stuff. And what happens is these people, they pull their shoulders out after doing it about 30 times. So they just keep putting these people in. It's like, cannon fodder or something. It's just what you'd expect from North Korea. But when they perform, you can see this stuff on YouTube, and it's just incredible what these people can do, and it's really, truthfully, beyond what the capability of the human body is, but they're able to, to do it. And they've won a lot of the most prestigious award in the circus business is what's called the Gold Clown, that's given at the Monte Carlo Circus Festival that was started by Prince Renier and Grace Kelly in the 1960s, and it's continued now that their daughter Stephanie's in charge of it now. And she was married to a circus guy for a while, and she's been a big supporter of the circus. And that festival there is a huge deal. That's like winning an Academy Award if you're in the movie business, and the Koreans have done very well at that. The other thing that happened this year in the American circus was the really shocking news that Ringling Brothers was going to discontinue carrying elephants after the 2017 season. And that is really, really a kind of an end of an era thing. The reason that they publicly stated that they did it is they said that public opinion had shifted enough, and there was, enough concerns about elephants being on circuses and all this, that it really wasn't worth it for them to do it. But the truth is, the reason they're going to stop carrying elephants is there's been, in 50, 60 cities around the country over the last few years, there's been all this restrictive legislation about the space you have to give to elephants, how they need to be tethered or not tethered, what equipment you can use with them. In some places, they're outright banned. In Madison, Wisconsin, you can't. An elephant cannot perform in a circus in Dane County, Wisconsin, and there's other places that are like that. And it just became too difficult for Ringling to follow all that and to know what the regulations were, and so they've kind of just given up the ghost. They had fought against this for years and years. And the force that's behind all this anti-elephant on circuses activity is our animal rights groups, particularly one called PETA, P-E-T-A, is the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. And it's really, to me at least, kind of out there. Here's the mission statement of this group. It's animals are not ours to eat, wear, experiment on, or use for entertainment or abuse in any other way. Well, that's obviously pretty strong, and sounds like, pretty much of a, fringe kind of group, but they have really, they've kind of brought down Ringling Brothers. And what they have done over the years has been that their people have worked, their lobbyists. It's a very, very well-organized, a lot of affluent people support it. They've got a fabulous advertising campaign. They use all these Hollywood actresses like Pamela Anderson that do these seductive ads for them. And again, you can see all this stuff on the internet if you're of such a mind, and obviously some of you are. And you know, I mean, it's just kind of mind-boggling to me. But what they've done is they were able to, you know, to talk to and push through this legislation to city councils and county commissions and all these other places to restrict or prohibit the use of elephants on circuses. And this has been, you know, what they've been aiming for in the circus industry for the last, 20 years or so. And there's been, you know, Ringling Brothers has been tied up with a ton of litigation about this. PETA files these complaints with the, you know, United States Department of Agriculture. And the USDA is required to investigate any complaint they get about the handling of elephants, and I think other animals too, but specifically on elephants on circuses. And so they just are constantly filing these complaints that Ringling Brothers has to defend, and it's just carved off a lot of time and, you know, treasure for the circus, and it's not, you know, it's one of these things, they've been fighting it and they just got kind of tired of fighting it. The Ringling did, though, last year, one of the big things that happened is that it turns out the Humane Society of the United States, which is a really kind of an animal rights group in spite of its name, had brought all these charges up against Ringling Brothers. Well, Ringling Brothers found out that they had paid a guy that worked for them, an elephant handler on the show, to kind of make up this stuff, and they found out that he paid the guy $190,000 to do all this. And so Ringling went back to court and sued them, and they got a $16 million settlement, and everybody in the circus business felt very vindicated by that. You know, I don't think there's anything wrong with having elephants on circuses, and I'll get into that in a little bit, but there's still a lot of support for having elephants on circuses, and one of a couple of things happened this year that shows that that's there. One of them is a guy named Cunningham bought a circus, and I think we don't know. People have told me in the business that he's gotten money from PETA, but, you know, who knows? I don't know that for a fact by any stretch of the imagination. But anyhow, he has decided on his circus he's not going to have any elephants. And his main customers are shrine temples. And it turns out he goes around and he starts to bid these things, and they find out that he doesn't have any elephants and they don't want him, and he's gone broke. And, you know, which I think, you know, good for him. And so but you know, that shows you that there's still quite a bit of interest in this. And the funny part is the people that sold him the circus, apparently they didn't have a non-compete and they have to use a different name, but they're filling the dates that he had. So let's see how this works. They sold it, got all the money from him, and then they go back and get all the dates they had, and basically get back all the goodwill that had been developed. So they had a pretty good deal there. The other really weird thing that happened with elephants this year was there was a legislation that passed both houses of the California legislature, which made the use of bull hooks illegal. A bull hook is a device that, you know, it's a little longer than this, and it's got a hook on an end, and you put, you know, elephants have got harness and stuff on them, and you use it to just, you know, show them which way you want them to go and stuff. And that's always been like, you know, a symbol of evil to PETA. And so they got this legislation passed in California to ban this, and that effectively bans the use of elephant acts because you just can't do it without using this piece of equipment. And so the funny thing that happened was when it got to the governor, Jerry Brown, he vetoed it. And here's the reason he vetoed it, is there was pressure from the movie community that they wanted the one guy that owns an elephant who uses it in all the movies. His name's Gary Johnson. The elephant's name is Ty. They wanted to be able to have that elephant still be available for movies. And so they got to him, and he vetoed the legislation because of that. And so that gives you some idea about how politics works. And I might add on PETA, the circus is just part of elephants are just part of a much bigger agenda with them than with all the other stuff they have, they've been going after the size of chicken coops. They've gone after SeaWorld. They've gone after, pharmaceutical companies doing tests on animals, all these kinds of things. And, I'll tell you, it's something to look at. I mean, you wouldn't think that a group like this would be able to basically stop Ringling Brothers in their tracks, but it took them a number of years, but they did it. And it's really could be a classic study, if there's any academics out here, that in interest group politics, because it's really, kind of a case study in how to advance a rather fringe agenda, I guess would be the best way to say it. So anyhow, that is that. Now, the interesting thing to me about the elephants is Ringling Brothers has had, they opened an elephant breeding project in 1995, and it's first class all the way. They have had 23 live births there, which is by far the most in this country of any zoo, circus, individual, anything, and is like third in the world. So I think that gives you an idea how poorly they treat their elephants. And, there's nothing like this. And there's evidence, and, obviously I'm prejudiced, but there's, I'm aware of evidence that circus elephants live longer than zoo elephants, that circus elephants, there have been some studies done that do things like measure blood pressure and weight and, muscle tone and other things like that would, give you an idea of the physical health and maybe the mental health of the animals. And circus elephants generally do better than zoo elephants, and people have hypothesized that it's because they have something to do. And, elephants are so strong, you'll see them like, a stake in the ground there. They can pick those stakes up and they could walk off anytime they wanted to. And I've had people tell me that they've had elephants that have done that. They want to get a drink of water and there'll be like a stream nearby. And they'll walk off and take a drink and then come back and take their foot and just, jam the stake back in the ground. Elephants are smart. Listen, they're really smart. And so the point being is that, if an elephant doesn't want to do something, you're screwed. And but also, there's a small circus, the Carson and Barnes Circus from Hugo, Oklahoma. They've got a small breeding program out there, and they've had like 5 or 6 elephant births there. And, so, the very fact that circuses have been more successful in general than zoos in breeding elephants ought to tell you something. This is what's happening in this country with this anti-elephant business is really, part of a larger trend that has occurred in most European countries. Now, Germany, I think, still can exhibit elephants, but in like the Scandinavian countries and in England, you can't use elephants in circuses. And really, surprisingly enough, in this fall of this year, Switzerland went and banned the use of elephants on circuses in their country, which really was a surprise. There's no problem with circuses in the former Eastern Bloc countries and in Russia. There's still lots of use for elephants in those, and then Asian circuses also have them. The thing with it, though, is no matter how well you treat your elephant, people that are of the mindset that appreciate and support all of PETA's agenda, there's nothing that can be done to change their minds of no matter how well elephants are cared for. And I know, Ringling Brothers has bent over backwards to take good care. They take superb care of their animals. But the problem is, to the PETA people, all it looks like to them is that those elephants are in a luxury prison. And that's the way that they look at it. And it's a huge philosophical divide. A little bit about the history of elephants on circuses, that the first circus in America was in 1793. The first elephant was in 1796. They combined, the first elephant on a circus was in 1798. And elephants became the unit of measurement of the circus for years and years. And for example, in 1878, the Sells Brothers Circus, its winter quarters was in Grandview, it was here in Columbus, about where that big apartment complex is on Fifth Avenue near Olentangy, right by very near where the railroad track is there. In fact, that railroad track is what Sells Brothers Circus used to load out of. But anyhow, in 1878, they called their circus the Seven Elephant Show because they had 7 elephants, and that was the most that any circus had. And then, you see if people have graphed this, and you see this huge growth of the number of elephants on circuses. By the early 1880s, the 2 biggest circuses in the country each had about 22 elephants. And that just kept growing to, full-grown elephants in the old circus days, they would use these converted horse cars that they'd put the elephants in. They'd have to, gut them and redo the inside. But you could get 13 elephants inside a railroad car. And so very many of these big circuses from the 19-teens to the 1940s would either have 13, 26, or 39 elephants. And the record for elephants, and I think this is just amazing, in 1955, the Ringling Brothers Circus had 55 elephants on the show, and about a third of them were these babies that had been imported from India, and they'd only been there, been in this country for about like 9 months or something like that. They're just, they're little kids is basically what they were, and they just had a hell of a time with them. They'd run all the time, and they'd want to play, and it was just a disaster, and they cut back to about 35 elephants the next year. So, that was the end of that. Now, the Jumbo is the most famous elephant that was ever on a circus in the United States. He came over in 1882. He was such a draw, and this will give you an idea of the import of the circus back then. In 1881, the year before he was there, the Barnum and London Circus, made $506,000. Or no, I'm sorry, $405,000 that year, which is still giant money for 1881. But in 1882, they made $610,000. P.T. Barnum owned half of it. And think about this. He made $305,000 in 1882. And that's some real money. But, Jumbo was one of the greatest animal draws that was ever on a circus. It added a word to the English language. And this is unbelievable. He was hit by a train in St. Thomas, Ontario, Canada in 1885 and was killed. And what's really strange is here you have the single most valuable animal that was ever on a circus. And it gets hit by a locomotive. How many times that's happened besides that? Once. So, you wonder, I've always thought that, the guy that handled him we know was a drunk. And I suspect there was something to do with that. But poor Jumbo just got hit on by a locomotive, and that was the end of him. On elephant births, the first elephant born in the Western world since Roman times was in 1875 on a circus in the United States. He didn't live very long, but then there was another one born in 1880 and another in 1882 on circuses, and then 2 more in 1900 and 1901. And I mention that solely because it wasn't until 1902 that any zoo had an elephant birth. So the circuses were ahead on that too, and there have been any number of, it's one of those things that I think, people have lost count of how many elephants have been born to, on circuses anymore. I've talked about all the kind of the negative stuff that's happened this year, but there are some bright spots, and one of them is Nick Walenda, who's done these 3 skywalks over the last few years. He walked across Niagara Falls, the Grand Canyon, and then earlier this year he did one at night with a blindfold on in Chicago. And, he's the real deal. And, that's not something that I'd want to do. And what was interesting, though, they were talking I've watched all of them, of course, but the one from Chicago, the commentators, they were doing like a, play-by-play on a football game or something, and the guy keeps saying, he says, this is the greatest daredevil feat ever done in the history of the world and all this stuff, and that's nonsense. But in 1859, they really did have the greatest daredevil thing in the world. At Niagara Falls, 2 hotels sponsored wire walkers to go across, and there was a guy named Blondin, and another guy's name was Giuseppe Farini, whose real name was Bill Hunt. And they had this contest, and when they'd walk across it, they'd have this big pole, but it's still a amazing feat. Well, one of them would put he carried his manager across. And I'm just assuming that manager was told he wouldn't be the manager if he didn't do it. But I can't imagine. Then another one of them took a kid in a wheelbarrow across, and the most amazing one of them took an oven up and cooked a meal in the middle on this rope on the middle of Niagara Falls. There's pictures of this. This really happened. And that was the most amazing thing I've ever heard of. And the other one is that when Philippe Petit walked between the World Trade Centers in 1971, that was a amazing thing too. The other thing that's happening is there's been a number of youth circuses in America over the last. They've grown a lot in the last 20 years, and it remains to be seen if that's going to translate into more of an interest by everyone in this country in the circus, or if it's going to be one of these things like soccer is, although soccer seems to be changing. But for years and years, how popular soccer was on a high school, and I'm sure I'm like everybody else here. I went to lots of my children's soccer games when they were little. But up until maybe recently, that never translated into it becoming a popular professional sport. And so far, there doesn't seem to be that there's been any positive benefits to the professional circus industry as a whole from all these youth circuses. But there certainly are. There's far more kids from grade school level to college level that are participating in circus arts now than there's ever been before. I think that should be a positive thing. And the last thing I want to say is there's still a lot of good circuses in the United States. Soleil is wonderful. I saw, I'm sure, I saw it out by Cooper Stadium, last summer. I thought it was a wonderful circus. I thought it was a wonderful show. I'm sure a number of you here went to it. And also, Ringling is still good. The Big Apple Circus, which is just, teeters on the brink of going out of business every year, but, it's very good. And there's another circus, and they've actually are going to put on 2 units next year, called the Universal Circus, that is an African-American owned circus, and most of the acts are African-American, and it's African-American themed, and it's a wonderful circus. And they haven't played here in Columbus for about 10 years, but, I've seen them every time. I saw them in Indianapolis last year, and, it's a wonderful circus, and that's certainly worth seeing. So, I guess it's kind of a mixed bag. In general, though, I think, my friends in the business, everybody's moaning what a bad year it was and how nobody made money, and then all this, there's a lot more to it of PETA, passing out leaflets at shows, and they've done stuff like, handcuff themselves to cages and stuff. They do a little of this kind of, theater stuff. So anyhow, it's kind of a mixed bag. Mostly I'm afraid to say that there's, this has not been a stellar year for the circus in America, but there have been some bright spots. So anyhow, if anybody has any questions, I can, I've got 4 minutes. Is that right or not? No. No questions. Sorry.
We can get 1 or 2 if you want to.
Oh, if you want, I don't care. If they have them.
Does anybody have a question?
Yeah.
Right here.
What's going to happen with the elephants that are not used? Are they going to go to the sanctuary in Fellsmere, Florida?
Yeah. And there's some noise they may actually put out an elephant show and route it in places where they don't have a problem. So, and the other thing is that, particularly with Asian elephants, there's something like about 20% of them are in captivity now. There's really, the population in Asia has stabilized on that, but it just, it's a good thing they're doing with this breeding of these things, because there's be a real strong possibility if all the elephants are left in the wild, they'd become extinct. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Very interesting. You know, I would have lost any money that I would have bet on the fact that this crowd would have come up with Frozen. I would have never guessed that you guys would have thought of that. Thank you, everyone. Happy New Year, and I'll see you on the 4th. Until then, be a Rotarian all week long. Sorry.